This is Debt Free in 30 Technical Tidbits Edition, where we answer short questions from our listeners about debt, money, and personal finance. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Today on Debt Free in 30, we're going to cover a topic we have never covered before: consumer proposal revivals. Allow me to explain. Listeners to this podcast are very familiar with consumer proposals. It's a deal we make with the people you owe money to eliminate your debt. I didn't invent it. It's based on federal law, and it's designed to help people with too much debt avoid bankruptcy. Because it's based on federal law, there are rules, which you can find in the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act. For example, in subparagraph 66.31 sub 1 sub A, it says that a consumer proposal is deemed to be annulled if the consumer debtor is more than 3 months behind in payments. That makes sense. In a typical consumer proposal, you pay a set amount each month for a maximum of 5 years. If you get 3 months behind in your payments, obviously something has gone wrong, so the consumer proposal can't continue. What could go wrong? Job loss is a big one. If you lose your job, your income drops and you can't make your payments. But what happens if your job loss is temporary? What if you get laid off for 3 months, then go back to work? Is there any way to restart a proposal? I'll have a detailed answer at the end of this podcast on how we deal with people in a proposal who lose their job or have other interruptions in their income here at Hoyes Michaelis, but there is a legal answer to that question. Subparagraph 66.31 sub 7 of the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act allows for an automatic revival of a proposal. If you get 3 months behind and the proposal is annulled, but within 30 days you can get back on track, I, as the administrator of your proposal, can send a notice to the creditors asking for it to be revived, and if no one objects, the proposal is back on. But what if the creditors say no, or what if you can't get back on track until after the 30-day automatic revival period? Well, there is another option, and that is to go to court and ask the court to revive the proposal. How does that work? I've got an insolvency lawyer with many years of experience to answer that question, so let's get started. Who are you, and where do you work?
I'm Richard Howell. I'm a bankruptcy lawyer certified by the Law Society of Upper Canada as a specialist. I'm a partner at Clark Farb Fixel in Toronto, and I've been doing this for a lot of years.
Many years. So let's talk about consumer proposal revivals. So we've talked about consumer proposals many times on this show before. It's a deal you work out with your creditors. It's obviously part of federal law. The typical proposal is you're paying a certain amount of money each month over a period of up to 5 years. If you get 3 months behind in your payments, and I'm oversimplifying this slightly, but let's just take the typical case, then your proposal is annulled. It's dead. That's it. There is a provision in the Act that says a proposal can be automatically revived if you can basically bring it up to date. You've only got 30 days after the annulment to do that, though. In other words, you got to contact the creditors, nobody can object, and so on. What we're talking about today is what happens if my proposal is annulled because I got 3 months behind in my payments and I'm not able to automatically revive it in that additional 30-day period. Well, the only way to bring the proposal back to life is to get the court to say that you can do it. Am I correct in that, what I've just said there?
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. So how does this process work then? So let's say I'm in that situation. And maybe you can kind of paint the picture for me of someone who would be in that situation. Off the top of my head, I would think it was somebody who things were going along okay. They were able to make a bunch of the payments in the proposal, and then something happened. They lost their job, they got sick, whatever, and as a result got so far behind that the proposal was annulled. But now they're in a position where things have improved again. They're back to work, their health has improved or something. Is that kind of the typical scenario of someone in this situation?
Exactly. I guess the first question is the proposals must be performed within 5 years, or if it's a shorter period on the proposal, that is, if it's a 3-year proposal, within the period of the proposal, which means if the default is in the 4th year, but there's a lot of money still owing. Typically, these defaults don't get caught with some trustees for a while. If you owe $5,000, for example, on a proposal that was $500 a month, and you've got 3 months left to pay to the end of the proposal, that's going to be very hard. You're going to have to come up with the $5,000 in that period.
So what you're talking about is this has to make sense. So, okay, let's go through the scenario then. So let's assume that I'm somebody, my proposal has been annulled, it's past the automatic revival period, but I would like to bring it back to life again. And let's assume that my trustee says, okay, well, you're better off going and talking to a lawyer then who can make this application for you. So they phone you up and they say, hey, Richard Howell, I would like to go to court and have this my proposal revived. What kinds of questions are you going to be asking me? And obviously, you've kind of sketched it out. Does this make sense is really the main question, I guess.
Yeah, why, if you couldn't pay then, what's changed? I'm going to need a statement of income and expenses, if assuming that they sort of pass the this makes sense on the phone. I'll be contacting their trustee just because it's more expeditious, and get the trustee to scan me over the creditor's package, the estate general ledger, and the notice of default. They'll come in at that point. We'll look at it, and I'll find out just what they caused the defaults and what they're going to do about it and how.
Is it fair to say that the typical revival is happening for a proposal that still has 2 or 3 or 4 years left to run on? I mean, as you said, if I'm $5,000 behind and the rule is a proposal must be completed within 5 years, and that's 5 years from when it started, obviously. So, okay, I got to come up with $5,000, $10,000 in the next 3 or 4 months. The chances of success are less likely. So is it fair to say that the typical revival is happening, in the first half of the proposal period as opposed to right at the end, or am I not correct in that?
They seem, in my experience, they're all over the map. I've had some sort of sad cases where they've got down to the last couple of payments. They may have paid $10,000 or $15,000, and there's $800 to go. The proposal's annulled. Some checks bounce, or some oversight, and it costs them the lawyer's fee to go back to court and get a revival. They can't just march in with the $800 and say, here you go. But yeah, there's, on the other hand, I've got one, I think this month, where they made 3 payments on the 5-year proposal.
And it's already been annulled.
Yeah.
And so in that case, I mean, if I'm the court, my obvious question, and you already asked it earlier, is, okay, how does this make sense? If you made 3 payments and now it's been annulled, meaning you missed at least 3 more payments. So you missed more than half of the payments, or else it wouldn't have been annulled and we passed the automatic revival period. I assume the court's going to be asking the same question. Does this make sense? Is that how it... Well, actually, before we talk about the court, so let's kind of wrap up then. I come in to see you. You're going to ask me for some information. How much, what's my budget look like this, at the moment, get the documents from the trustee. And then from there, you're going to prepare, I guess, an affidavit and motion materials to go to court. Is that what happens?
Exactly. We haven't quite got to the dog ate my homework as an excuse stage, but there have been a number that just inadvertence, or they change bank accounts or things like that. The court's not too harsh on these things because, after all, the creditors have agreed to this proposal to start. It's in everybody's interest that the proposal carry on and that the creditors get paid and that the debtor gets back in the saddle. So it normally goes through.
Okay, so it normally goes through. So you prepare all the paperwork, you go to court, and I assume it takes, I don't know, a month or whatever to get the court date. You've got to serve notice and so on like that, roughly that. And obviously it can vary. You go to court, you present the arguments, and in most cases in your experience, like you said, the court is amenable to this because, hey, the creditor's already said yes, and all we're asking the court to do is put us back where we were had we not defaulted.
Exactly. I think I've done 50 or 60 of these things, and I haven't lost one yet. I've had a couple of near misses, but normally I've been getting the orders.
It's been working. And so it would be unusual for somebody to object to it then, because if I'm a creditor and it goes through, I'm going to get all the money that I had agreed to take originally. There's really not a whole lot of point in objecting to it, I guess.
That's right. I've never seen an objection in any of these. No, typically they're credit card debt. They're already at collection agencies, and nobody's going to bother. They never answer on them.
Okay, and even though you've served them, obviously, you've notified the creditors that this is happening. And yeah, in my experience, it's exactly the same. The proposal gets filed, we send it to the bank, and the bank says, okay, we're going to agree to this proposal, and then we're going to, shuffle the debt off to, a different division or a collection person or a debt buyer or something, because we already know what we're going to get. We don't really need to monitor it. So if something goes off the rails later on, the bank's kind of already written it off notionally. So they're not really paying that much attention that requires them to be sending lawyers to court to object to something, because if they object, it probably means the person's just going to end up bankrupt anyways. Is that what would happen if the proposal isn't revived?
Or they just go off into the never land.
They just do nothing. Yeah. So once a proposal is annulled, and assuming that it's not revived, you cannot file another consumer proposal on the same debts. Is that correct?
Without leave of the court.
Without court approval. Okay. So if my proposal is annulled, I've got, I've got many choices, I guess. I could do nothing. I could go bankrupt. But I could also have my proposal revived, which is what we've been talking about. I could go to you and see if the court will put it back where it was. Or I could go to court and ask the court to let me file another proposal.
Exactly. We typically do that after, when it's too late to revive. For example, if the default was at the end of a proposal, a 5-year proposal, and they don't come to see you until a year later, you can't revive it at that point.
Because the rule, the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act says a consumer proposal must provide for its completion within 5 years.
Exactly.
If we're already at year number 6, kind of hard to revive it then.
But where there's a will, there's a way, and the courts have been making orders allowing the filing of a second consumer proposal. And that's a little bit of a windfall for the debtor, because they can run around and gather up all their post-proposal debt and put it into the new proposal.
So let's think this through then. So I filed a proposal and I owed, 5 different credit cards, let's say. The proposal 2 or 3 years later is annulled, and during that time period, I have incurred new debt. Maybe I've got a payday loan, maybe I owe some money on taxes, maybe I was actually able to get a credit card that I've now defaulted on. So if I revive the original proposal, only the debts that were there at the start are included.
Yeah.
But if I file a second proposal, then all the debts I have as of that date are included.
Exactly.
And so if I'm coming in to talk to you to get advice, so let's say, I'm 3 years into the proposal and it's been annulled, so should I revive it or should I get permission to file a second proposal? How would you advise me on that decision?
If you had a revivable proposal during the period that was possible to revive, that is, if it wasn't so much money you couldn't do anything, I'd tell you to do the revival. I'm not totally comfortable with the fresh proposal picking up a whole new whack of debts, but it's currently working. I would guess if you did it during the revivable proposal, you'd get some flack from the court.
Because the court is going to say, look, there's already this other process there. Do that and get that done. So now I guess if I've somehow incurred a lot of new debt, maybe tax debt, for example, then, okay, I can see why you'd want to do a second proposal. But of course, with a second proposal, the creditors then get to vote on it.
Yeah, the creditors can say nothing doing, but again, you get the same voting results from the first.
Well, if there's a whole bunch of new debt, so let's say I had $50,000 worth of credit card debt, that proposal's been annulled, and now over the last 3 years, I've somehow managed to incur $50,000 worth of Revenue Canada debt, maybe because of a tax reassessment, or I cashed in a bunch of RSPs, or whatever happened. Well, now if I do get permission to file a second proposal, I've now got a big voting block from Revenue Canada. That makes it a lot riskier.
Indeed, but if you've incurred the 50 at Revenue Canada, they're going to be on your case anyway, and you're likely going to be doing something different rather than a new consumer proposal.
Gotcha. So it's a much riskier option. So your advice then is, obviously your advice is to, in a situation like this, once the annulment has happened, is to, talk to a lawyer and, figure out what the options are, I guess then. And obviously there's a cost for doing this. I assume the cost will vary, depend on, the complexity of the case. Is it a relatively standard thing? How does it
It's
work?
Relatively standard. If it's got a lot of hair on it, then if I've got to go back, for example, I've had a couple where the registrar wasn't happy with them, and we've had to file fresh evidence, and that costs a little bit more.
So in most cases, if a debtor phones you up, you're able to give them a reasonable idea of what this is going to cost up front then.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And I would assume that people who have to revive a proposal, the proposal was annulled because I didn't have money. I wasn't able to make the payments. So what kind of payment arrangements are they then going to be able to make with you?
Really what they're able to do within reason. I've had them stretch over several months.
So, you would love it if they would just, get their parents to give you a check and just pay for it right up front, but it's more typical that you'll take something up front and then there's payments over a period of time.
Yeah, well, I hope it's not too typical, but yes.
That's just kind of the nature of the business. And most of the hearings that you do would be in Toronto court, and we're recording this at my office at Yonge and Bloor today, which is not that far from the courthouse. Is the process similar in other jurisdictions? So, for example, if I was going to the court in Kitchener or London or Windsor or Ottawa, is it basically the same type of approach in your view?
Yeah, very much so. At least, yeah.
It's a fairly standardized thing.
I can't speak to Ottawa, but I imagine I know the bankruptcy judge up there, and he's a very practical person, and they'll be doing the same thing, I'm sure.
So you mentioned the word practical. Is that how you would characterize most of these hearings then? That, the judges aren't out to, it's not a game of gotcha. It's more, as they say, a business person statute, and they're trying to find a reasonable resolution? Absolutely.
The getting debtors back on their feet and making the world go around is the function of the bankruptcy court. Now, if you've got a dishonest debtor, that's a whole different issue. There's a very elegant solution that a trustee in Alberta put together for me. I was trying to get a discharge on an old bankruptcy, and the client was in Alberta and clearly couldn't afford the trip to Toronto. And the trustee out there said, well, why don't we make an in-bankruptcy proposal, that is a bankruptcy while you're in bankruptcy,
proposal while you're
in bankruptcy, and why don't we offer 100 cents on the dollar? And when that goes through, then the bankruptcy is annulled. Now, normally 100 cents on the dollar is fairly serious, but the trustee said, well, look, these are old debt. You aren't ever going to get a vote on any of these. And sure enough, the 100-cent dollar proposal went through. Nobody heard from anybody, and he's now discharged. It saved him a lot of money over coming to Toronto and fighting out a discharge.
Yeah, so there are often ways to get where you need to get, is what it amounts to. Excellent. Well, I appreciate that. Richard, thanks very much for being here today.
My pleasure.
Thank you. That was my conversation with Richard Howell, an insolvency lawyer with Clark, Farb, and Fiscal in Toronto. So here's my take on this. My firm, Hoyes Michaelis, helps people file many dozens of consumer proposals every week, and we've been doing it for 20 years. Based on that experience, I have one simple piece of advice. Don't let your proposal be annulled, because if you're always up to date with your payments, you never have to worry about going to court to revive your proposal. Now, of course, I'm ignoring the obvious. Stuff happens. You get laid off, or you get sick, or you have an unexpected car repair expense, and cash flow is tight, so you get behind on your proposal payments. Here's how we help you avoid those problems when you file a proposal with Hoyes Michaelis. First, we do our best to make sure that the proposal is affordable. In most cases, the proposal payment is a lot less than what you were paying on all of the minimum payments on your debts, so that's easy. I've had lots of clients over the years who owed $50,000 on credit cards and payday loans and other high-interest debt, and their minimum payments were over $2,000 per month. We file a proposal where the payments are in the range of $300 to $500 per month, so the proposal immediately improves their cash flow. Second, we work with you to time the filing of the proposal for when it works for you. You may decide to wait 2 weeks to get caught up on your rent or your hydro bill, so that you're starting the proposal with a clean slate. If you were laid off from work, you may decide to wait to file until you go back to work and get your first paycheck. We let you pick the start date of the proposal that works for you. Third, and most importantly, even though proposals are set up with monthly payments, we strongly recommend that you set your payments up to match your pay frequency. So if you get paid bi-weekly, we'll set the proposal payments up bi-weekly to come out of your bank account automatically on payday. That way you never bounce a check because the payments happen on the exact day that you get paid. But it gets better. If instead of paying, say, $400 per month on your proposal, you pay $200 every 2 weeks, you'll always be ahead on your payments because twice a year you have a 3-pay month, so you'll be making an extra $200 payment that month. If you get paid weekly, we set it up for weekly payments. So 4 times a year, when you get an extra week's pay, you are getting ahead on your payments. If you never miss a payment, after a year, you'll be 1 month ahead. That's a great feeling. We also encourage you to make extra payments whenever you have extra cash. Did you just get your tax refund? Well, that's one reason why a proposal is better than bankruptcy. In a bankruptcy, you lose your tax refund, but in a proposal, you get to keep it. If you got a $1,000 refund, you could decide to put $500 in your emergency fund and make an advance payment of $500 on your proposal, so now you're $500 ahead. Did you get a raise at work? Great, you can bump up your regular payments anytime. I have lots of clients who call me and say, things are going great. Can you bump up my payment for $100 per week to $125 per week? Sure, no problem. And now you're getting a further $25 ahead every week. You see where I'm going with this. By filing the proposal when it's best for you and setting you up to make electronic payments on your payday, we are increasing your chances of success. You get ahead on your payments, so you're never behind, so there is no chance that your proposal gets annulled, and there is no need to ever worry about going to court to have your proposal revived. At Hoyes Michaelis, we want to set you up for success. That's peace of mind, and that truly is a fresh start. That's our show for today. Show notes can be found at hoyes.com. That's HOYES.com. And in addition to a full transcript, we've also got links to Richard Howell, in case you need an insolvency lawyer, and I've got links to consumer proposals and the relevant legislation we talked about on today's show. Thanks for listening. Until next week, I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.